always like Yogi Berra. He always has had such wisdom. What this points out is if we don't have a plan, we really don't know where we're going to end up at. And it's appropriate that this, the background of this slide is part of the cliff dwellers in southwest Colorado, who probably left our state. What's our gap on resources for water as we look to the future? That bottom blue area of a little over or nearly 1.2 million acre feet is the amount of water that we're presently using and taking care of our M&I. This is primarily municipal and industrial uses in the state. As we look at that next line there, the green, light green, the 350,000 acre feet, that's water that we anticipate being able to develop from a series of projects that are pretty much on the books at this time, and I'll talk about them in just a little bit, and that's with a fairly high success of probably 70 or 80%. That purple wedge up there at the upper right corner is the gap, and you'll see over the top of this whole chart is a slender sliver of passive conservation. Let me talk about that for just a second. Passive conservation is that part that we're going to do whether we want to or not, so to speak. It's the water efficient fixtures that you'll have in the next home you own, or if you replace a toilet, a dishwasher, a clothes washer, it'll come with additional low water consumption technology. And so we will get about 150,000 acre feet of benefit out of what we're calling passive conservation. And I want to talk a little bit later about what we're going to be looking for as we look to more active conservation. So looking at that wedge up there, the purple wedge, 390,000 acre feet, that's kind of a medium range, depending on what kind of economic growth we have, what kind of population actually shows up, and it could be higher, it could be lower. So how do we fill that gap? And we've been discussing water plans in Colorado, or water strategies, for a number of years. In 2005, the legislature enacted House Bill 1177, which set up what we call the Basin Roundtables. And this is a picture of which basin you may be in if you're a Colorado resident. And now in each of these basins, there were designated people from water districts, from local government, from local water utilities, agriculture, environmental interests were prescribed and brought together, and then that Basin Roundtable selected a few additional people to round out. And then these Basin Roundtables, I think the smallest one's about 32 or 3 people, up in the North Platte, to as large as 65 or 67 people out in the Platte, South Platte, as well as the Arkansas. And about 400 people statewide that set down on a very regular basis. They've been doing this for coming up on 8 years. And what they've been working on are the needs of their basin. The consumptive needs, whether it be agriculture, industry, municipalities, and the non-consumptive needs, which are those things of recreation, environmental protection, and it's really the non-consumptive is a part of our calling card in Colorado. It's our snow-capped peaks, it's our high mountain waters that provide rafting and kayaking and boating and gold medal fisheries. And so each of these basins have looked carefully at what their assets are and what their future needs are. And so what water supply is available, and then what projects that are necessary to accomplish this over the near future, as well as a longer range perspective. So we fondly call this the Colorado Water Conservation Board, the IBCC, and Roundtable process. The IBCC is made up of 2 representatives from each of these 9 roundtables, and then the governor appoints an additional 7 people to that. 2 members of the General Assembly, typically the chairs of the House and the Senate Ag Committee, also participate in this 27-person IBCC process. And we meet on a regular basis. We'll be meeting next week in conjunction with the Water Conservation Board to have a discussion about where we're going on our planning, kind of give an update. We do this at least annually. We share most of the same staff with the Water Conservation Board, and so we have a good relationship and we have good communications. And so the idea behind this was to have a larger discussion on a statewide basis, and something that the governor has alluded to and previous governors alluded to is having a stakeholder group or a ground-up grassroots type of participation in the planning of Colorado's water future. As we look at what we're working on then within the IBCC and the roundtables really meet about once a month for most typically. They have some of their own subcommittees. The IBCC, on the other hand, meets about every 2 to 3 months as needed to have this interaction with the roundtables and try to look at the state on a statewide perspective. One of the interesting observations have been when the roundtables were first initiated, people within a roundtable didn't necessarily like the other people that were in the roundtable. And the concern about, we've always heard this adage to Mark Twain, which now people are telling us Mark Twain didn't really say this, but it really was colorful and sounded like something he probably would have said, but that whiskey's for drinking and water's for fighting. Well, as was mentioned, the governor wants us, I think he still believes whiskey's for drinking, but that water should be for cooperation and collaboration to take care of our future needs. And so as a committee, the IBCC has sat down and we've done a series of I guess, investigations and spreadsheets to look at what are those other sources of water that might be available to meet that gap or the future needs. Our status quo has always been go back to agriculture and buy the water. And we hear sometimes some people say, well, municipalities went out and took the water from agriculture. It's really not been the case. There's never been a recorded case of anybody going out with a revolver. They always go out with a checkbook. And there's usually been a willing buyer and a willing seller. And so that water asset ends up being that farmer rancher's 401 assets for his retirement. And oftentimes the highest bidder is the municipal water provider, and so that's where that water ends up going. So as we look at the different sources, we've identified what we call 4 legs of the stool, for lack of another example. And one of those legs is conservation. And what are we doing in conservation? And as we come out of the drought of 02 and 03, and some people argue we may not have fully come out of it, and then we got hit with the drought of 2012, it's interesting to go back and see what our water providers have done on a statewide basis. As you look up and down the Front Range, the water consumers have reduced their consumption by about 20%, 22%, because of incentives from the providers, as well as just the right thing to do. A lot of education on what you can do as a consumer. And so it's a great credit to our water providers that in the case of Denver Water, they tell me that they are producing, or they're still down 20% consumption, and they have had a 10% increase in population in that same time period. Is there more to be achieved through conservation? Absolutely. Probably the lowest hanging fruit has been harvested, and as we go forward, additional conservation yields will be more difficult and perhaps more expensive. But I would point out that those of you that have been participating in that, has your lifestyle, your quality of life really changed because you're using 20% less water than you might have been a decade ago? And I would say not. And I'd say that probably the next 10% or 20%, we'll still have the quality of life we have here. We may not have as much bluegrass lawn. We may not water the sidewalk as much. We may take shorter showers or not go to the car wash as often. But there are some things that we're starting to see a change in culture within water consumption as we've started raising the awareness of what a person's water footprint might be. And I think it's been giving us good results. Conservation is one of the legs of the stool. One of the other legs of the stool are what we call IPPs, and you have to jump over to about that new and existing projects is where that IPP would be. IPP stand, it's going to be on another slide, so let me explain it now. It's Identified Projects and Processes. And these are the projects that are in place right now by our water providers statewide that anticipate taking care of some of their future needs. And their projects, as you come up the Front Range in the southern part of the state, the Arkansas Valley conduit to take water from Pueblo Reservoir down to Lamar, 40 different communities to be served by it, the southern delivery system of Colorado Springs, the Chatfield reallocation just on the south edge of the metropolitan area, Gross Reservoir for Denver Water's northern firming of their needs. You also have Moffett firming and Windy Gap firming projects that are in the works. Further north, Halligan and Seaman reservoirs by Greeley and Fort Collins. These are expansions of existing reservoirs. And then there's the Northern Integrated Supply Project, which is Northern Waters project to bring water to 15 growing communities in north central Colorado. So this is an example of IPPs, and we feel we have to have a fairly high percentage, that 70 to 80% rate of accomplishment in those, because if we don't, then we have to look to other sources. That means maybe then we have to raise the expectations on conservation, or one of the other areas is maybe we have to have new supply projects from somewhere else. And that's the third leg of the stools, new supply. And typically in Colorado, when we need additional water, we've gone and looked to the western slope, because in Colorado, 80% of our water resources fall on the western slope in the form of snow, typically. 80% of our people live on the eastern slope. And so years ago, our ancestors said, you know, there's a lot of water over there. And so we built a number of tunnels and diversions that have brought west slope water over to the Front Range, and it's helped our economy as a state. It's supplemented water to agriculture for food. It's helped the growing cities of the Front Range have sustainable water supplies. But we're probably coming to the end of a lot of extra water in Colorado, and not only because we have 5 million people and we have 5 more coming, but also the fact that we're seeing some changes in climate that may make it hotter and drier, and so we may not have the supply in the Colorado that we've traditionally had. Colorado probably has not used their full allocation, but there's a great debate right now of how much water that we can develop the unallocated part of the Colorado River Compact. The lower end, Nevada, Arizona, and California have fully utilized their share of that, and so that's one of the concerns we have. Is there going to be enough water to protect our streams, our industry, our economy? And then the other fear is always if there is a call on that compact. There's certain obligations within a compact, and if we get short of water in the west, how are we going to meet Colorado's responsibility in that agreement? And we have a couple vessels, Lake Powell and Lake Mead, that end up being the bank account for the upper and the lower states. But they are highly variable, and we were fortunate last year to have a lot of runoff, and now this year probably a record low runoff. And so that's the high variability of our climate. It's nothing new. Colorado has always had issues with drought in one part of the state or another. Unfortunately, this past year we've had a statewide drought. So as we look at new projects, we have to be pretty careful on how much we develop and what the impact is to these other communities. And so the new projects are the third leg. The fourth is what we call the alternatives to ag transfer. I mentioned earlier that our status quo has always been to go to ag. We're looking at some alternatives to that. When you look at what happened Crowley County about 30 years ago, 92% of the water was sold from that county and ended up in the Front Range municipal water supplies. And that county is economically dried up. We've tried a couple prisons. That didn't seem to replace that kind of water resource and the economy that comes with it. And so we know how not to do it. And so as we look to the future for new water resources and supply, agriculture will still be one of the considerations. We're looking at some things like rotational fallowing, where a farmer enters into a long-range agreement with the municipality, or his ditch company does, to provide water on a regular basis, and perhaps fallows a third or a fourth of his farm each year. And the yield that those acres that are fallowed would have produced in water gets to go to the municipality. There's also interruptible water supplies, in which the same type of arrangement in times of drought. The agriculturalist may not have enough water to sustain and finish a crop. Maybe that's the opportunity to sell his water resource for that year to a municipality. A municipality is able to put it in their reservoirs or in their system and get through the droughts easier. So we're looking at several different arrangements like this. With it comes a lot of high overhead or transaction costs, a lot of attorneys, a lot of hydrologists, a lot of engineers to figure out and make sure that we're true to our water system of prior appropriation, and that we don't injure other water users in whatever new arrangement we might have. So with those four legs in mind, and it's kind of been said, the top of the stool ends up being our environment, the non-consumptive, because those other four legs tend to support it in various ways. But it's very important that we keep adequate flows in our rivers so we can sustain the ecology of those rivers. As we put all this together, we've gone into what we call some scenario planning. And scenario planning is just a fancy way of saying we're looking at some futures. We're not certain of which course we're taking, what kind we'll be, where we'll be at in 40 to 50 years. But let's take a look at 5 different courses of action that we may end up with, and then come back and focus on what those possible futures, what we should be doing today. And if there's common, what we call no regrets actions that we should be doing today or in the near future in order to be prepared for whatever nature and population growth may bring us in the future. So as we look at these no regrets, these are some examples of what we have come up with within the IBCC, and we'll be discussing this further next week.